Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Spain's migrant regularization program is not a good signal for the rest of Europe. EU Migration Commissioner Magnus Brunner said after an emergency meeting of EU interior ministers in Brussels on Tuesday, as Europe sought to move beyond the Ceuta crisis while tightening its migration policy. Now, on Thursday, the debate has shifted to the European Parliament, where the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs is holding an extraordinary hearing on Ceuta with the President of Ceuta and the Commissioner for Internal Affairs and Migration. Now, joining us to discuss it further is Marcin Bużański, Director of the Center for Diplomacy and Negotiation at Collegium Civitas. Good to have you with us.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
So we've had these row of emergency meetings in Brussels, now also with the European Parliament as well. I mean, looking at the scope of the response now, as well, if we just tell our viewers again, if we look at what happened at Ceuta last week, those 70,000 who came through that enclave but have also since then been returned. What's the takeaway? What do you expect from this emergency meeting at the European Parliament today?
Well, I expect it's going to go on, three lines that we've been really observing around this crisis. So one line is on the actual EU response and the EU, let's say, border controls situation and status. And here, we've got two elements. One, which is sort of more behind closed doors, that actually a lot of the mechanisms that were put in place have to some degree actually worked. I mean, we've just witnessed probably the quickest and the fastest pushback and the biggest pushback in history. Most of those migrants have returned. There has been, basically a point blank showing that the return regulation that is currently being processed, the migration pact, which has just been approved and is now in place, can in effect prevent these kind of situations, and that actually the crisis in Ceuta is in many ways, not showing the reality that the overall migration situation in Europe is getting better and better, and those numbers are coming down and down. And behind closed doors, there was a very cordial and cooperative approach in this yesterday meeting between the ministers of interior of EU countries. Now, the second dimension, and this will come out more in the European Parliament committee, is on the political level. And here the situation looks differently, because when it comes to actual approaches to responding to migration, well, we all know that this is that political heavyweight, that this impacts elections, this breaks governments, this gives elections wins. So what we've seen across the board is a whole wave of messaging across Europe and across EU. Those letter of 22 countries basically highlighting that this is unacceptable, that we have to have a different situation when it comes to protecting our borders, that this is really a stress test for Schengen. Italy closing, the Schengen zone when it comes to Spain. All of this, points a picture of disunity among the EU, which is really designed towards electorates or the political electorates of certain countries. And here, of course, Italy has been leading, let's say, this pact, but we've seen this among many other countries. That is a bad signal because it doesn't send an overall signal of a unified European response. And mind you, we saw what has been happening behind the closed doors. It was completely different. And then there's the third element, which is the geopolitical element, which is the question of relation with third countries such as Morocco, which are becoming more and more, I would say, not just hostile, but transactional and actually impacted by other geopolitical means, by other players such as the US, but also other countries when it comes to designing their policies towards EU and towards some of the countries. And this is something that Europe needs to address more pragmatically, but also more forcefully. And this is something that needs to be discussed.
Interesting assessment there also in terms of, you said it was very cordial behind closed doors, but then what we saw, as you said, publicly was a very different story. Also, mind you, what the commissioner said then, he said that's not the entire source of and the reason why this happened and why this happened. That's kind of an interesting question here. Now, without putting too fine a point on it, I mean, the numbers there were 70,000. As you said, they've all been now returned. You mentioned the success of the EU Migration Pact, which only about a month in its effectiveness right now. But if we look at the bigger picture here, what's your main, let's say, gut assessment here? What exactly went on here? I mean, not to say it's fault, but why these huge numbers? Why now? Was that deliberate on the Morocco side? Was it something else? I mean, we've heard of smugglers. We've heard different reason. What's your most, let's say, credible assessment of what pushed this whole thing in this case in Ceuta?
Look, I think it's fair to say we had a combination of factors that kind of shaped into a perfect storm. And there's and all of them have an impact. It's hard to say which was the defining one. But first of all, yes, there has been this the Madrid Supreme Court ruling that was interpreted as anybody who comes to a Spain territory can stay in Spain, sort of in short. And this has been blasted out across the social media, which was picked up, of course, by the Moroccan population. And here, the smuggling networks. I mean, everybody saw this as an enormous business opportunity. They just made huge money. Now, could this wave, and this has been building up, for a couple of days. It didn't happen just from day one to day two. Now, the other fact is that this really could have been, fully prevented by Morocco. Now they've potentially gave way to, I think, some more of the movement. This is not new. This is pretty regular, which has been happening between Morocco when it comes to Ceuta. It's also known to happen in Turkey, with Libya, where countries force Europe's hand to give them more money. Put simply, and this is a standard thing that happens every couple of years or every even couple of months. Now, I think this was happening here, but then it went a little bit out of hand. And at the same time, we have this geopolitical strengthening, muscle flexing of Morocco, which sees now more power when it comes to its very strong relation with the U.S. At the same time, when the U.S. is in a diplomatic crisis when it comes to relations with Spain, so an additional factor here for Morocco to press, let's say, this point. We've also seen a massive wave of disinformation happening immediately when this was building up. This is attributed, well, it's not formally attributed, but it's clear that also Russian disinformation agents had a hand here, and other agents working towards disruption. And this has been one of the calls behind closed doors at the EU, that this has to be in-depth, investigated in-depth to exactly see how this is happening. And there are calls actually to give Frontex, to give border guards more and the EU more authority when it comes to actually also fighting the border control, the border war at this level. So I think this was a factor, and then the final factor is actually the way that Ceuta is positioned, which would allow for this kind of crossing, and this is pretty unique. So it's not that this is really a replicable kind of situation across the EU. It's not also that it presents a real threat to Schengen. I mean, it has been sold so politically because of those images, of course, which are extremely powerful. But the de facto risk for Schengen, it didn't really happen, and that was kind of in fully control from Spanish authorities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said there, Marcin, a perfect storm of many different factors. Hard to say exactly which one it was. But also interesting, you pointed out social media there. I mean, we've seen a lot of misinformation also circulate around. We're not quite sure who is behind that. Again, that big question, as much as social media can be also served as for nefarious purposes. Looking at the same time now, at this meeting, what's happening at the European Parliament, this committee, just kind of also combined with what happened, what we've heard in the last sort of couple days, Greece also proposing higher, more intense measures suspending asylum completely. I'm just wondering what you think practically can be concluded. Are we going to get anything out of this committee? I mean, there's only so much they can actually suggest. But at the same time, like, what about these plans of Greece being harsher? Is that now going to be, let's say, more listened to? Is that practically going to be implicated? Just give us a short insight on that.
Sure. Look, those calls are not new. They're just renewed, and they're happening because everybody's digesting a political crisis around this. The EU has just is processing almost. The Parliament is going to vote on the return hubs. So this would the return regulation, which means that the EU can actually enforce return hubs. There are more and more measures being put in place. The migration pact is just been put in, so it's really a call for the member states to be more aggressive in implementing it. And by the way, there is a regulation in the EU that allows to suspend and really fight back when it comes to borders when there's a hostile, let's say, quote unquote, hybrid attack on migration for a third country. This has happened when this happened after Poland was attacked through the Belarus crisis 2021, and we know very well that there was a culprit, Belarus and Russia. Here, Spain absolutely didn't want to put Morocco in this position. They want to cooperate with it, but the mechanism for that is in place. So, this is much more about a political consensus here. And, for Greece, of course, this is critical because it is probably the most exposed country when it comes to migration flows and this type of migration hybrid attacks, in which sense it politically the prime minister wants to showcase that he's in the leading seat when it comes to those responses. And look, everybody in Europe, all the leaders understand that this is what the far right is going to run their political campaigns. We have a whole array of elections coming up in many countries. This is going to be a key issue. So effectively what the Greek prime minister is saying, let's get our hands around this. Let's be, as Europe, stronger, united, more forceful, because this is otherwise going to impact all of our elections, and we're going to have a, hard right-wing wave of political victories coming up if we don't act here decisively. I think that's
so different levels, different levels there indeed. As you said, perfect storm, but one that we're going to have to navigate. Look, thanks so much for that. Always a pleasure being with us here. Marcin Bużański, thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching World Talks, but do stay right here on TVP World for more. Goodbye.